All right, so this is another episode that I've pushed back for a long time now. The Great AI Game Dev Divide. So it's basically an overview of what artificial intelligence, how artificial intelligence is being considered for video game development. The video game industry has had some kind of troubled times in the history. And this is yet another one. Now that artificial intelligence is indeed, a bit everywhere. But before we get into the mess that is AI in game development today, I want to take you on a quick trip through history because AI in video game development is actually a new thing. It's been there since the very beginning, and understanding where it started makes the current hype cycle even more, in my opinion, ridiculous. But now, of course, I want to know from you what you guys think. And of course, feel free to reach out and connect to our Discord channel, but also on the official website, datascienceathome.com. So, very brief history, just to have an idea of what or how AI has been used in video game development or in some very famous games that probably the new folks don't remember or don't even know. Well, AI in video games, in fact, starts with the arcades, the 70s and the 80s. And back then, AI meant just one thing, illusion, right? So we remember Space Invaders. I was not there, but I played Space Invaders a lot in the 80s. The alien fleet that speeds up as you kill more of them. For those who don't remember this game here, right? You had to shoot at these flies or whatever they were. And what happened is that it was some kind of adaptive thing. The more you killed, the faster they went, right? It's not adaptive intelligence. It was definitely not. It was just a clever design trick. You get fewer sprites, you get less rendering load, so the CPU runs faster. But of course, it felt like the game was kind of fighting back. A beautiful accent, I would say, but absolutely, in my opinion, it was not planned. I'm not a super expert in the internals of that game, but in fact, from a gamer perspective, it looked like intelligent. Then we have Pac-Man. That was the 80s already, and this is where AI got. AI. It's not AI. I'm going to explain what it was, but it was something really, really interesting. Now, very few people know that the four ghosts, Blinky, Pinky, Inky, Clyde, nice names, by the way, they had different personality, okay? So, for example, Blinky chases you directly, Pinky tries to get ahead of you, Inky does something which is very weird, which means triangulation based on your position and Blinky's position. And finally, Clyde chases you until he gets close and then runs away to his corner, to the closest corner, right? It's like a social anxiety ghost. I don't know how to define. But these were very simple algorithms. But of course, when they interact with each other in the game, as you play the game, the player perceives coordination. There is absolutely not. They perceive teamwork. They perceive strategy. But none of that is actually real, okay? It's emergent complexity from very trivial, simple rules. And that principle, making system simple, feels intelligent. That's the foundation everything else is built on. Now, under the hood, these were, in the jargon, they are called finite state machines, or FSMs. An NPC, those who don't pay attention, NPCs are non-playing characters, which is the character that you usually don't control directly. Typically, you fight against, or in a co-op game, they are, on your team, helping you out with missions and quests. But an NPC can be in one of those, handful states. For example, patrolling, chasing, fleeing, and then it switches between them based on triggers, conditions. Okay, it's super simple, and they work, right? Now, We fast forward to the 90s, well, not so much fast forward, just one decade, which, by the way, in IT, one decade can be extremely long. But in any case, the 90s bring what? They bring 3D, and with 3D comes a real problem, which is how does an NPC navigate a three-dimensional world without walking into walls, obstacles, other players, other characters, etc., right? That was the age of A-star pathfinding. So A-star became kind of the workhorse or algorithm that let NPCs actually move through levels intelligently, find a player, navigate around obstacles, take routes. It's still very used pretty much everywhere, I would say. And that is the time in which Doom saw this type of algorithms in action. And for those who are not familiar, this is of course some links that I took from YouTube. A gameplay of Doom in 1993. You had enemies that could react to sounds and line of sight. Super basic, but very effective. And then we got Half-Life. Those who don't remember, Half-Life was pretty much a game like this one, 1998. And his Marine blow everyone's mind. These soldiers would flank you, they would throw grenades to flush you out of cover, they would call out to each other. It felt like you were fighting some kind of a coordinated squad, right? It looked like that these soldiers were actually communicating with each other. But that nothing happened like that. The game AI, if you can call it like that, it simply cheated. Okay, constantly. The AI knew essentially where you were even when it shouldn't. And so these kind of cheats they are called perfect information. Because some players, well, in the modern games, players actually NPCs do not know exactly or all the time where the player is. The player can be hiding behind a wall, and that would not be known. The position of the player would not be known. They have to see you. While back in the days there were this kind of cheats constantly. The AI knew where you were even when it shouldn't. And it had basically perfect information. This was a necessary hack. The CPUs of the time, of course, they couldn't run truly sophisticated decision making. So developers made something, to save times, to save computational complexity. And of course it worked. Players didn't actually care how the AI found them. They cared that the, firefight felt intense, the gameplay was, fun. Now, if we move even forward in the 2000, the 2000 is where things got interesting from an architectural perspective, because developers actually move away from rigid scripts and started building systems. Okay, systems means sets of rules that interact to produce unscripted behavior. And of course, the big name in the field is Fear. 2005. I think I have a gameplay example here. This still is a game that impresses you. Consider it was 2005. Okay, more than 20 years ago. Now, the AI of Fear is still a very active subject today, over 20 years later. And the reason is that there is an architecture called GOAP, or Goal-Oriented Action Planning. Now, what is GOAP? GOAP, instead of scripting, for example, if player behind cover, throw grenade. Okay, that's a very simple behavior that an NPC would perform, and it looks real. Instead of doing this, you give the NPC a goal. For example, eliminate the player. And then you also give a set of possible actions. For example, find cover, suppress, flank, throw grenade, shoot, whatever. The NPC at that point plans its own sequence of actions to achieve the goal in real time. And so what this means is that the AI flanks you from the left while suppressing you with fire. Next time, same room, different conditions, it pushes you out with grenades and rushes you, right? Now, the behavior is different every time because it's not scripted, it is planned. These are, of course, the good cases. There are the bad cases where the the plan is not really what you expect, and then you would see these very weird behaviors. Speaking of behaviors, that was the time of behavior trees. Okay, around the same time in the 2000s, behavior trees emerged as a more scalable alternative to finite state machines. Finite state machines are still considered very reactive models, while behavior trees are more sophisticated, and indeed they are. Think of them as a hierarchy of decision, a tree where each branch can be a task or even an entire tree, and the AI walks the tree to figure out what to do. The biggest example that I can recall of this is Halo 2, one of my favorite games ever, like all time. Halo 2 popularized this a lot. For those who are not familiar with what Halo was amazing, by the way. Something like this. I mean, this is a remastered version in 4K, but the game was pretty much the same. Now, Halo 2 popularized this. It became kind of the industry standard, and still is, in fact, in most AAA games. So, to recap, FSMs for simple stuff, behavior trees for complex but manageable NPC logic, and GOP for genuinely emergent tactical behavior, right? Now, 2010, two things happened in 2010 from a research perspective. There was, of course, procedural content generation, PCG, and machine learning. Okay, that was the boom of these two technologies for several reasons. Machine learning, in particular, and neural networks, for example, because GPUs started to become a lot more powerful than the decade before, and also because there was an impressive amount of available data with respect to 10 years early. And this meant that we could finally train neural networks in a much more complete way. So that was the decade of machine learning and procedural content generation. So PCG, again, isn't new. Roguelikes have used it since the 80s. But, for example, No Man's Sky, another massive game, took this concept to an absurd scale. For those who are not familiar with what I'm talking about, and it's a game that looks like this. This is the gameplay. There is an entire universe of planets, creatures, ecosystems, all generated algorithmically. And they count something like 18 quintillion planets. I didn't count. You can argue about whether the game was good at launch, but the technology was really a big leap. Then, of course, machine learning starts showing up. We had also what was Forza Motorsport, the Drivatar system. For those who are not familiar, this is what I'm talking about. Very nice game, amazing graphics. So what happened here is that this Drivatar system learns from real players' driving styles and creates AI opponents that actually feel human, right? There is no scripted aggression, there is no scripted driving, no rubber banding, actual learned behavior patterns from millions and millions of gameplays and players. And this is where player modeling comes in, AI that watches you, how you play, essentially, and adjusts the experience accordingly. So difficult scaling, personalized content, churn prediction. This is where AI stops being just about NPCs and starts, of course, being about the business of games, right? So why am I telling you all this? Because game AI has had a 50-year evolution, okay? 50-year, half a century. From Pac-Man's ghosts to GOP to neural networks, at every stage, the breakthrough came from engineers solving very specific problems. For example, pathfinding, squad tactics, world generation, not from slapping a general purpose language model onto everything and hoping for the best, right? These were very taught exercises and very customized research, okay? Keep that in mind, because what I'm going to discuss in this episode is about an industry that seems to have forgotten its own industry, its own history in a way. So if we fast forward to 2024, there will be a bunch of numbers that I will mention here because there is a survey from the GDC survey that I will use as a reference for this episode. But essentially, 2024, 2 years ago, a bit less, was supposed to be the year that AI transformed game development kind of entirely. We had Unity executives who were saying, it would help make game development achievable. Roblox generative AI lead claimed that we are entering, and I quote, a world where your success as a creator is determined by the success of your ideas rather than the ceiling of your technical skills. Amazing statements that actually were kind of fishy, and especially when you look at the numbers. So there is a punchline out of this. More developers are using artificial intelligence. And when I say developer, I mean game developers, okay? They are using artificial intelligence than ever before, but they hate it more than ever before. More adoption, more hate. And today we are talking about the most spectacular disconnect between corporate hype and developer reality that I've personally seen in 20 years of building software. This is an episode about the story of how artificial intelligence in game development went from a promised savior to what I'm gonna tell you, right? So let me give you the numbers first, because they tell a story that nobody in the AI hype machine wants to acknowledge. And as you probably know me already, I like to tell you stories out of the interpretation of the numbers, the facts. In fact, numbers are facts because there is a survey. People have answered. Now, there will always also be a bias, as I will mention later. But these are the numbers. I'm not making them up. You can check. There are a ton of links that I will report in the description of this video, and of course in all other channels, on the podcast, on the official website, datascienceathome.com. And if you want to discuss this or have your personal opinion, come on the Discord channel. Very nice place to have a conversation. Always happy to argue in a positive and creative and constructive way. Okay. So according to the 2024 Unity Gaming Report, 62% of game developers are now using artificial intelligence tools in their workflows. That's 2/3 of all developers. Okay. Now compare that to 2023, when the GDC State of the Game Industry survey showed only 31% were using generative AI. That's a massive jump. That's from 31% to 62%. In fact, it's doubled adoption in 1 year, right? So you think the developers are loving it because they adopt it more, the tools are working, productivity is through the roof, everyone is happy. Wrong. That is very wrong, because now these are the more interesting numbers. In 2024, the GDC survey found that 21% of developers thought generative AI would have a positive impact on the video game industry. And by 2025, just 1 year later, that number dropped to 13%. Can you believe that? Please do, because these are real numbers. So positivity dropped from 21 to 13%. At the same time, the percentage who think it will have a negative impact, well, that jumped from 18 to 30%. So it just didn't increase, it doubled again. So we have essentially more people using the tools, and at the same time, more people thinking that these tools are bad for the industry. That's not how technology adoption usually works. When people adopt something, en masse, they usually like it more over time, not less. And this is kind of the paradox at the heart of AI in game development in 2024 and until now, 2026. So to understand why this is happening, we need to look at what developers are actually concerned about. And so there are many concerns that people are definitely worried. So the first, of course, is the IP theft, okay, intellectual property theft. This isn't abstract. The concern is that these AI models are trained on data literally scraped from the internet without consent from the original creators. Okay, so when you use Midjourney to generate a texture, or ChatGPT or any other model to write dialogue, where did that model actually learn all that? Of course, from artists and writers who definitely never agreed to have their work used as training data. In fact, many of them didn't even know their work would have been used as training data. A developer in the 2024 GDC survey, he said, and I'm quoting, no matter how you put it, generative AI isn't a great replacement for real people, and quality is going to be damaged. Okay? That's what they said. Now, the quality concerns are getting worse, not better. According to data from the Game Developer Collective, developers are now 4 times more likely to say generative AI will negatively impact game quality than they were a year ago. In 2024, 34% were concerned about quality. In 2025, 47% are concerned. Okay? Think about that. We've had a full year of improvements to these AI models, GPT-4, GPT-5, all the other flavors, better image generators, more sophisticated tools, agentic AI, you name it. And still, developers are more worried about quality rather than less. How is that? So, who is using this? Well, and here are some other numbers that I prefer to show in another slide. So, this is what I find fascinating about the data. When you break down AI usage by role, you see actually the pattern. According to 2024 GDC survey, business and marketing departments are leading the charge in the most used population, the population that uses the most AI tools. Okay, they are the most likely to use AI. Production, team leadership, community, marketing, PR, you name it. Okay, these are the most likely ones. Who's the least likely? Narrative designers, QA workers, the people who actually have to work with the creative output and test whether it works, which is kind of funny, right? Another split, when you correlate AI usage with age, and you see the other statistics there, well, it turns out older developers are more likely to use generative AI than younger ones. 47% of developers over age 55 use these tools, compared to only 28% of developers between 18 and 34 years old. That's kind of backward from what you would expect, right? Younger developers who supposedly grew up with this technology are actually less likely to use it. Why is that? Well, I don't know. Maybe because they are the ones who see what's going on and what these tools are doing to entry-level jobs. I also have another opinion about this, is that over 55-year-old developers probably have a lot more experience, and they know how to control and to assess the quality of AI-generated code or AI-generated artifacts, so they can have a better life with AI tools, because they know how to control. While people who are learning, they would just accept what the AI is generating, or they don't understand it. So, here's when it gets actually even darker. The corporate mandates. So only 2% of studios mandate the use of generative AI, but 12% have banned them entirely. AAA studios are actually more likely to ban generative AI tools with respect to, for example, indie studios. 21% of AAA developers work at companies that have banned AI tools. These are the numbers that come from the survey. But there is one thing, and I was reading that's not actually captured in those numbers, the cultural pressure, right? Let me explain. More than half of developers, 52% in fact, work for companies that have implemented some kind of policy around generative AI, okay? And just because it's not mandated doesn't mean you can push back without consequences. That's very important. A developer quoted in an article about this very issue, and they said, and I quote, "The stuff that AI generates, you become the person whose job is fixing it. It's not why I got into making games," which makes sense. You enter the game industry because you want to build games. You don't want to review the code of an automated tool about writing a game, which makes perfect sense. So that's kind of the reality behind the numbers, in my opinion, because you're not using AI to be more creative. You're using AI to generate slop, and then you're spending your time, or most of your time, cleaning up mistakes. Let me call them like that. Let me be gentle, right? All right. So this is the quote that I mentioned before, and of course I will report the references in the show notes and in the description of this video. All right, let's move on. The AI disasters, let me call them like that. So let me tell you what happens when companies ignore these concerns and push AI anyway, regardless, right? Now, these are some of the most spectacular failures in 2024: Square Enix and Foam Stars, Call of Duty, and Larian Studios. Now, I'll be gentle with Larian Studios. These are three, in fact, the best, in my opinion. Well, they are my favorite studios in the game industry. Actually, Larian Studios is from Belgium. They are based in Ghent, very close to where I'm recording this episode and where I live. But that doesn't, it's not the metric to evaluate the quality of a Larian studio, of a studio. These are amazing studios, all the three of them. Now, Square Enix, one of the biggest names in gaming, they announced that their upcoming game, Foam Stars, used AI-generated art for in-game album covers. Now, their president, Takashi Kiryu, had written in a New Year's letter that the company would be, and I quote, aggressive in applying AI, whatever that means, to both content development and publishing. And you know what the response was? Global condemnation from both developers and the gaming community. Steam, the biggest PC gaming platform, the one I use 90% of the time, had to implement a policy allowing AI content in January 2024, and since then, the Steam homepage has been literally flooded with AI-generated games, right? One analyst looking at the data noted that Steam now promotes AI games through featured sections and special events. Then we had the Call of Duty embarrassment. This kind of my favorite disaster, and by favorite I mean the most embarrassing. But I also love Call of Duty, and I love Activision, the folks who produce Call of Duty. We're talking about a company with a $74 billion market cap. So for Call of Duty Black Ops 6, Activision released artwork for a Christmas-themed season. The loading screen featured the zombie Santa Claus, kind of nice. Except that the zombie Santa had 6 fingers. Now, you definitely remember when AI was not that good and it messed up with hands, right? So every time hands were generated by AI, most of the time they had like 6 fingers or 4 or even more. Then what happened is that another loading screen came out with a hand that had only 4 fingers instead, missing the thumb entirely. This was crazy and painful to watch, because this is a company that, they could afford to hire actual artists, but they chose not to. And the result is that they shipped promotional artwork that looks like it was made by someone who, I don't know, they've never seen a hand. But of course, it was using AI prematurely when the technology was not ready. And then we have Larian Studios. The most revealing incident happened, in fact, with Larian Studios. For those who are not paying attention, Larian Studios are the folks behind Baldur's Gate 3, the series of Divinity, one of my favorite RPGs, ever. CEO Sven Vinke gave an interview to Bloomberg explaining that Larian uses generative AI but not to replace workers or create content in the final game. They actually use it for reference images in concept art, placeholder text, internal PowerPoints, which seems reasonable to me. Very limited use, not in the actual game, just internal tools. And even then, the backlash was kind of immediate because developers on social media tore into him, literally. Why is that? Well, because even this limited use represents kind of a line that they are crossing. Bloomberg reported that developers inside Laren had actually pushed back against the use of generative AI, but the management pushed ahead anyway. So one analysis of this situation kind of nailed it, and I'm quoting it entirely. They said, workers are placed between a rock and a hard place. They could quit, but they'd been looking for work in a terrible hiring environment, competing with their peers for a scant number of positions. Many ad companies also pushing for the use of generative AI. So they bite their tongue, grind their teeth, and muddle through. So this is what actually the statistics that I collected from the survey don't capture. When we say 36% of developers personally use AI tools, that doesn't tell you how many of them are actually doing it because they want to versus because their manager told them to. Okay, so the article about Laren pointed out that the studio requires developers to pass incredibly stringent technical tests to get hired for obvious reasons, including people relocating internationally. So if you jump through all those hoops to get your, that's a dream job, in fact, and then leadership says, you know what, we are using AI for placeholder text. Are you really in a position to push back? I don't think so. Especially when the games industry has spent the last 3 years or more laying off developers wholesale. 2023 saw 10,000 developers, just to give you some numbers, laid off. January 2024, the very beginning of 2024, the industry had already hit half of that, okay? And then we know 2025 and 2026 will follow. Now, what management is telling investors, and I want to be clear here, it's not just in the gaming industry, it's pretty much across sectors, okay? That AI will solve their labor cost problems, that they can do more with fewer people. That's the narrative. So when you are a developer and your CEO says, we are using AI, in fact, what you actually hear is your job might be next. I'm oversimplifying, I know, but that's kind of the trend. And again, not just in the games industry, a bit across sectors, wherever software is in the equation. All right, let me be fair here, because it's not all doom and gloom, of course. There are places where AI is actually useful in game development, but notice what these use cases have in common. According to a survey by A16Z, the venture capital firm, it's a venture capital firm, so take it with appropriate skepticism. Okay, 87% of studios are using generative AI, Midjourney and other tools to create in-game environments. Okay, that's a big step. It's not internal tools; it's actually in-game stuff. Now, that's a legitimate use case. It depends. In fact, if you are using, for example, if you need, for example, 300 different rock textures, okay, for an open world game, well, AI can actually help you with that because it's a repetitive task. It's not creatively critical, and if it looks wrong, you can kind of spot it. Unity's own data shows that 71% of developers using AI tools say the technology has improved their delivery and operations. Pay attention to the word delivery and operations, not creative quality or game design. So here is where AI is actually being used successfully. And I made this tiny list of 4 sectors or subsectors within the game industry. QA and bug testing. So AI is being used to automate play testing and quality assurance. In fact, you can run an AI through your game thousands of times to find bugs edge cases, performance issues. That's, in my opinion, a good use of the technology. QA testing is critical, but it's repetitive, okay? And automating that aspect of game development, it makes sense, in my opinion. The second, unsexy sector is motion capture data processing. And Leighton mentioned they use AI to improve motion capture data processing using tools trained on their own data. That's another good use, in my opinion, taking something that would require manual cleanup and simply speeding it up. It makes sense, right? Then we have procedural content generation. AI being used to enhance procedural generation, the kind of algorithmic content and content creation that games have used, in fact, already for decades. Remember the No Man's Sky example. AI can make that process a lot more sophisticated, creating a lot better variety, more diversity, and even more interesting worlds or outcomes in general. So why not? And finally, we have the internal tooling. So reference images for concept artists, placeholder text that will be replaced before publishing the game with the real writing, internal PowerPoint presentations. This is, of course, what I call the unsexy stuff. It's not revolutionary, but it's useful because it speeds up time without removing away the creative aspect of building games. Now, if you are paying attention, what's missing from this list? Well, AI is not writing your compelling narratives, okay? It's not designing the core game mechanics. It's not creating the emotional moments that make games memorable, right? Krishna was a former senior engine developer at JJax. I quote him: "If you're going to have to hire actual human artists to fix the output, why not harness their creativity and make something new that connects with the players?" And that's the fundamental question that the AI evangelists don't want to answer. All right, let me move to my speculation here. And before getting to that slide, let me stay on this because I want to make an analogy that I keep doing. The analogy with blockchain, all right? Remember the blockchain hype cycle of 2021. Why I keep mentioning this is because I really find it overlapping. Like, it's so obvious to me. And let me explain. Back then, 2021, every company was announcing, these blockchain initiatives. Remember the NFTs were going to revolutionize gaming. What was the other? Was play to earn was sold like the future. Investors were throwing money at anything with Web3 in the pitch deck. You probably remember that. Now, what you also should remember is that developers hated it with their whole art. They knew it was BS. And of course, their executives were making announcements anyway because, that's what got investors' attention. Fast forward to 2024, 2025, most of those blockchain gaming initiatives are pretty much dead. The technology didn't solve any problem, at least not the ones that it claimed to solve. It actually created new problems, and developers who spoke up about the issues back in 2022 were proven right 7 years later. Well, 5 years later. AI in games is, in my opinion, following a very similar pattern. Executives love it because it sounds impressive, it sounds innovative, it's something they can tell investors to justify, salaries and expenditures. When they say, we are using AI to transform game development, of course, it's a better narrative rather than saying we are firing people to cut costs, right? But again, this is not only in the game industry, this is across sectors, which is the sad reality. But the developers, the people actually building the games, they are increasingly skeptical. They see the limitations, they see the ethical problems, they see the quality issues, and crucially, they see another important thing: their junior colleagues getting laid off while management talks about AI doing those jobs instead. The A16Z survey claimed that 73% of game studios are using AI, and 67 of developers are excited about it, whatever that means. Now, one analyst looked at that and pointed out the obvious, which I also mentioned in another episode, and I will report the link of that episode that I had with a friend of mine, Eliseo, when we spoke about AGI and the future of AI. And he said, if you ask developers to answer a survey about AI in games, the people who respond are inevitably going to be much more interested in AI than the average developer. It's called selection bias. It's the kind of statistical sleight of hand that makes AI adoption look better than it actually is. Meanwhile, the GDC survey, which doesn't have the selection bias, shows that developer sentiment gets worse every year. And that's, a fact. Now, jobs today, talent tomorrow. Let me tell you what really bothers me of this entire situation. Now, don't misunderstand me when I say this. It's not that AI tools are being used for creative jobs or tasks. Some of these tools are genuinely useful for specific tasks, as I mentioned. It's more that developers are being forced to use tools they have ethical concerns about, at a time when their job security has never been more precarious, right? While the executives claim this technology will, quote unquote, democratize game development. Now, wherever you hear or you read democratize something, run away. Run away, because that's a shitstorm coming towards you. If you want to democratize game development, you have to pay developers better. You have to stop the crunch culture. You have to stop the mass layoffs. You have to make it possible for someone to have a sustainable career in this industry without burning out by age 35. And by the way, burning out, for those who don't know, it's a synonym of depression. That's what it is. It's fancy when we call it burnout, but it's actually depression. But of course, doing this costs money, and AI promises to save money. And that's the problem. But that's what this about. When Unity's president talks about doing more with less and tightened budgets, and I quote, remember that this is coming from a company that actually contributed to those tightened budgets, okay, by simply laying off a huge number of workers only in 2024. When Square Enix president talks about being aggressive with AI, whatever that means, what he's really saying is we'd rather use AI than pay people and artists. The technology exists, some of it is useful, but the way it's being deployed in the game industry is primarily about reducing labor costs and not just about improving games. And again, I want to stress on this, it's not just in the game industry, it's a bit everywhere. It's across sectors. And of course, developers know it. That's why developer sentiment is getting worse, even as adoption increases. They're being forced to adopt tools that they know are being used to eliminate their colleagues' jobs. Okay? And this is something that very few people are looking at. And I read that, again, this is something that I said a long time ago in the same episode. Damn, that episode was really a really good insights, but I'm biased when I say that. So there is this developer, the GDC survey, who said, when we eliminate positions for juniors, that means they don't become mid-level, which means they don't become seniors, which means they don't become the vibrant creative voices and directors of tomorrow. And that's, the best summary I can get you about, what happens, if you push this layoff and replacement with AI. That's where you're gonna get. That's the real cost of this AI push, in my opinion. It's not just the jobs eliminated today, but the creative talent that never gets developed in the first place. It's sad, but it's true. So, where does this leave us? Well, the numbers tell a clear story, in my opinion. AI adoption in game development is increasing, but developer sentiment is getting worse. It's not getting better. More people are using these tools, more people think they are harmful, right? That's not sustainable. So either the technology will improve to the point where developers actually want to use it, or the backlash will force companies to scale back all the AI initiatives they are starting now. You know what my bet is? My bet is that we are going to see, again, the same pattern we saw with blockchain. A year or two, maybe three of hype, some high profile failures, and then a quiet retreat as companies realize that AI actually doesn't solve the problems they thought it would, and then they will do something else. The useful applications, of course, will stick around. Automated testing, enhanced procedural generation, workflow optimization. This will stay. This is where AI actually is an interesting tool. The revolutionary promises about AI writing an entire game, I don't think so. I think that this is an illusion that will fade away. And of course, the developers who spoke up about the ethical concerns and quality issues, well, time will tell, but in my opinion, they will be proven right. And just like they did with the blockchain. But of course, in the meantime, a lot of people are going to lose their jobs. Yeah, that's what I think. A lot of mediocre games are going to ship with AI-generated content that players can spot from a mile because they can. Yeah, and the game industry is going to waste a lot of time and definitely a lot of money chasing a technology that's better at generating investors' presentations than it is at making entire good games. That's what I think. Of course, that's all for today. Thanks for listening to this episode of Data Science at Home. And next episode is going to be, in my opinion, very interesting because I'm going to talk about AI NPCs. So conversational characters, and of course AI used for that. It's going to be an interesting episode because we know how good AI is at generating text and conversations, but there are some details that people are ignoring, and I'm going to show you in the next episode. If you enjoyed this episode, of course, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and of course, if you're on YouTube, subscribe, please. That's my currency. This is all free. My currency is your thumb up and like and subscription. And of course, feel free to leave a review. It helps other people finding the show. Of course, if you are a developer, if you're a gamer, why not? I mean, you are very welcome to join the Discord channel. You will find the link again in the description and of course on the official website datascienceathome.com. Until next time.